Tonight, counting the votes as polls shudder on a closely watched Pennsylvania primary. Plus, consoler in chief as President Biden visits Buffalo in the wake of a horrific mass shooting and a bloody weekend. This as Russia lands its final blow in Mariupol. Ukraine pulls out even as Finland and Sweden move to join NATO. And unintended consequences. How the Fed's effort to cool down the economy could make matters worse.
Too often it leads to a crash landing for the economy.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. It is Election Day, and all eyes are on Pennsylvania. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening in Washington, D.C. I'm Jenna Browder. 5 states are voting in midterm primaries this election Tuesday. They include North Carolina, Kentucky, Idaho, Oregon, and, of course, all-important Pennsylvania.
Polls closing there as the voting winds down. A hotly contested Senate race in Pennsylvania could shift the balance of power on Capitol Hill after November.
CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka has been keeping an eye on the race all day and joins us now. Matt, you talked to candidates and voters in the Keystone State.
Yeah, just last week, and it sure does look like this is going to be a toss-up race right now. The Pennsylvania primary has been closely watched around the country because there are just so many storylines and there's just so much at stake. The Republican field looks to be a very tight 3-person race between celebrity Dr. Mehmet Oz, former hedge fund manager Dave McCormick, and media commentator Kathy Barnett. Oz and McCormick both spent big, but Barnett was surging in the polls heading into primary day. All three courted Trump voters while campaigning, but Oz got that coveted endorsement. His opponents said Trump picked the wrong guy, but here's what Oz said after he voted today.
I think Kathy metaphorically had her moment in the sun, and I'm very proud of the president's endorsement. He said I was smart, tough, and I never let you down. Smart enough to understand the issues, tough enough to not wither in the face of criticism, and when you go to bed at night, you'll know I'll never let you down. And I just cast a vote for myself, which is...
Now, Barnett has surged, but has some recent controversy. She's faced criticism heading into primary day for old tweets appearing to bash Muslims and pictures of her walking near members of the Proud Boys on January 6th. Barnett said those issues were not on the minds of voters today.
So as a law-abiding citizen, I wanted to hear what my president had to say. We prayed for our country. We laughed. We met new friends. We got on the bus and we came back home. And I believe that is overwhelmingly the people who went and participated or went there on January 6th. That's the beginning and the end of that story. So what I'm very...
On the Democratic side, polling shows Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman as a big favorite to get the nomination, as he hopes to win back some rural blue-collar voters in the state. But his campaign announced over the weekend that Fetterman suffered a minor stroke. He remains in the hospital, but released a message saying he's doing well and will be back out campaigning soon if he wins. He cast an emergency absentee ballot from the hospital on Tuesday and is currently undergoing a minor procedure to fix what was wrong. So lots to watch for in another race that could come down to the wire in the Keystone State. Guys.
Exciting race, and glad to hear he's okay. Thank you so much, Matt. Well, the commander-in-chief turned counselor-in-chief getting choked up while comforting the families who lost loved ones at the deadly mass shooting at a Buffalo grocery store last weekend.
Now, President Biden traveling to New York with the First Lady today, calling white supremacy a poison. Tonight, law enforcement says social media is to blame for Saturday's violence. CBN News correspondent Brody Carter has more on this. Brody?
John, Jenna, President Biden is calling Saturday's mass shooting an act of domestic terrorism motivated by racism. He's asking Americans to give hate no more room to grow.
White supremacy is a poison. It's a poison running through it. It really is.
Outside the Tops Friendly Market in Buffalo, where 10 African Americans were targeted and gunned down Saturday, President Biden and the First Lady paid their respects, laying flowers at a nearby memorial, mourning with the victims' families, and condemning white supremacy in America.
Now's the time for the people of all races, from every background, to speak up as a majority in America and reject white supremacy.
The FBI is investigating this attack as a hate crime. New information says the alleged gunman, 18-year-old Peyton Gendron, spent months planning the attack, A new nearly 600-page document shows Payton did reconnaissance on the market for months, drawing detailed sketches of the inside with plans to attack multiple other targets.
I believe as a society we're becoming desensitized to these type of issues.
Dr. Donnell Harvin, former chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence for Washington, D.C., believes the suspect was radicalized in a very short time by racist ideologies on the internet.
One, social media is a problem. And we need to have a serious discussion about the content. You can find the manifesto online if you look hard enough right now. You can actually still find in the dark and deep web the video that he posted. Perhaps the only positive thing in this tragedy, it's introduced to the greater population this theory of the Great Replacement theory.
Harvin says the theory is a racially motivated means to use violence against people of color, claiming white people are being replaced by minority populations, an issue former Dallas Police Sergeant Trey Penny says, if unchecked, will lead to more mass shootings in the future.
We've seen with the liberal and progressive side, with all the Black Lives Matter, Black nationalist ideology. That does not belong in the public space. That does not represent the political interests of this country. We need to be in front of America and explaining how we need to unite, because we are the United States of America.
Now, there were rumblings the president would announce a strict policy change when it came to gun laws today. However, it was only the insinuation of nothing concrete, rather much more the president's support for getting AR-styled weapons off the streets. John, Jenna, back to you.
All right, thank you. Brody Carter reporting. Turning now to another mass shooting in California. Orange County prosecutors charged the suspected gunman in a church shooting with several counts of murder. The community is remembering the victims of what police are describing as a politically motivated attack at Geneva Presbyterian Church in Laguna Woods, where a Taiwanese congregation meets regularly. The shooting left one man dead and 5 others injured. The suspect, 68-year-old David Chu, reportedly was upset about geopolitical tensions between China and Taiwan. The sheriff calling the man who was killed, Dr. John Chang, a hero.
Dr. Chang charged the individual, the suspect, attempted to disarm him.
The sheriff said Chang's actions probably saved the lives of upwards of dozens of people. The congregation's pastor also jumped in, hitting the shooter with a chair. Well, Vladimir Putin's plan to take over Ukraine may be hitting a wall. Russian troops are suffering major defeats, and NATO is expanding on Russia's border.
Both Finland and Sweden moving forward in their bids to join NATO, the process taking anywhere from 4 months to a year. Publicly, Russia's Vladimir Putin says it's no big deal, but his actions suggest otherwise, moving nuclear weapons to Russia's border with Finland. The two countries announcing plans to join the alliance. Finland's admission would put another NATO nation on Russia's border. In the past, Putin has called the alliance's expansion into Eastern Europe a threat and has threatened retaliation. But when the president of Finland delivered the news in a phone conversation, he said Putin took the news calmly and didn't repeat those threats.
What he said doesn't mean that you shouldn't be all the time quite well aware and follow up what really is happening.
Putin may be talking softly, but he's swinging a big stick. This video showing Russian trucks carrying nuclear weapons to the border with Finland. On the ground in Ukraine, in the ruined city of MARIUPOL, some 260 wounded fighters holed up in that steel mill have been allowed to leave and taken to Russian-controlled territory. The Ukrainian government is working to secure the release of hundreds more, though it would mean they would become prisoners of war. It comes as Ukrainian troops continue to score more victories, retaking Kharkiv and reaching the Russian border. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky congratulating those troops.
Дуже вам вдячний від всіх українців, від кожного, від себе, від моєї сім'ї.
The UK now estimates Russia has lost 1/3 of their ground combat forces. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
The United States and our allies and partners are focused on giving Ukraine as strong a hand as possible on the battlefield and at any negotiating table so that it can repel Russian aggression and fully defend its independence and sovereignty.
And the flood of Ukrainian citizens fleeing the fighting is now starting to reverse. The country's border service saying more people have returned to the country than left in recent days. And in another blow to the Kremlin, McDonald's now says it's leaving Russia. The American chain announcing it will sell off all of its business there.
Well, here with us now is Clifford May, founder and president of Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Cliff, thank you so much for joining us in our studio this evening. In a recent Washington Times piece, you wrote that the absence of an off-ramp for Russia, it seems like there's an absence of an off-ramp for Russia. Is a diplomatic end to Putin's war in Ukraine, Cliff, all but unlikely?
It's unlikely at present, yes. Vladimir Putin has shown no signs that he wants to compromise. That doesn't mean he won't change his mind tomorrow. Things, of course, have not gone the way he expected. He thought he would be able to take the country in a few days. He thought he would decapitate the leadership, probably kill Zelensky. None of that happened. He lost what's called now the Battle of Kyiv. He is fighting now for the eastern section of the country, Donbass. He would very much like a land bridge all down the eastern side and across the southern side to the Crimea, which he took from Ukraine in 2014. That's also proving challenging. The fighting in the eastern section of the country, I would say, is stalled or stalemated. Not that there's not bloodshed every day, but it's not clear which side is making progress. That's a frustration for Putin, but he has not yet shown any signs that he's willing to sit down and offer compromises.
You know, with the world focused on Ukraine, there's a lot less attention right now being given to the Iran nuclear deal. It seems like the Biden administration was willing to make some pretty big concessions to get a deal done. Now, though, 4 years after the Trump administration pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, still no deal. Are Iran's rulers, Cliff, demanding too much, even for President Biden?
Yes, that's exactly the right way to say it, Jenna. Too much even for President Biden, after having made no concessions that we know of to the U.S., after the U.S. making concession after concession. Essentially, the Iranians said, and they didn't say it directly to the Americans because they won't deign to sit in the same room at the same table with the Americans. So it's all done through other envoys, Russian envoys included, which is crazy, as I might add. So the Iranians are saying, okay, one more thing, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, you need to take it off your foreign terrorist organization list. Now that seems to be a bridge too far, because more than 600 Americans have been killed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Our military people don't want to do that. And it appears at the moment that President Biden is saying, I can't do that either. By the way, at one point, I believe the Americans said to the Iranians, how about we take it off, but you promise, give us your word, that you won't try to kill any former or current American diplomats or government officials. Because they'd said they want to kill John Bolton, they want to kill Mike Pompeo, they want to kill Brian Hook. They wouldn't even say that. And I'll add just this one more thing. The American government ought to say not just, please tell us you won't kill American officials or ex-officials. How about you won't kill Americans at all? Because the Iranian government has threatened Americans, not least people in my think tank, by name. So we should demand a little more and not surrender to the Iranians. But for now, those talks are stalled, and the longer they're stalled, the better. We should be out of them.
You would think that would definitely deter any kind of deal coming through. And to your point earlier, it is confounding to think that Russians are involved in the nuclear deal process. You know, speaking of Iran, protests in Iran are now entering the second straight week amid rising food prices. The State Department tweeted a message of support for the protesters, saying they have a right to hold their government accountable. Cliff, how much pressure does this put on the regime?
Well, I think we know very clearly that people throughout Iran are they're tired of being ruled by theocrats, by Islamists, by jihadis. They're tired of seeing their economy suffer, and they protest. But it's very brave of them to protest, because this government has no compunction whatsoever about putting down those protests as hard as necessary. They will shoot as many people as they need to. They will jail as many people as they will need to. They're being brave, but it's not like this government says, well, at a certain point, we have to listen to the people. The government does not say that. Raisi, the current president, he's responsible very much personally, because of previous positions in the government, for thousands of deaths of Iranian citizens who were seen as dissidents or protesters or simply not loyal to the theocrats who run the country.
Yeah. All right, Clifford May, founder and president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. We appreciate you coming in this evening. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Cliff. Coming up, a major breakthrough for school-age kids in the fight against COVID-19, and light at the end of the tunnel in that nationwide baby formula shortage.
Welcome back. The FDA is authorizing a COVID-19 booster shot for school-age kids. Now, kids ages 5 to 11 will be able to get the Pfizer booster. This is the youngest age group to get the green light so far. Only about 28% of kids that age have received the first 2 doses of vaccine shots, according to the CDC. An indication many parents may forego the booster shot for their kids.
Well, the FDA is stepping in to ease America's shortage of baby formula. The agency reaching an agreement with Abbott Labs to restart production at its largest factory. That plant had been shut down for what the FDA called, quote, unsanitary conditions. According to the company, an investigation found no conclusive evidence its product was linked to any infant illnesses. Abbott says it will take 2 weeks to get the factory up and running again, and another 6 to 8 weeks before formula reaches store shelves.
Well, sky-high inflation is up next. Why even some top Democrats are blaming the crisis on massive government spending.
Well, welcome back. President Biden puts blame for soaring inflation on current events like the war in Ukraine and congressional Republicans. But critics, including some top economists, disagree.
Yeah, they say the president's policies and Democratic spending have made inflation even worse. One of those critics is media executive Steve Forbes. He talked to CBN's Gary Lane about the role government spending has played in the current inflation crisis.
Inflation has already hit 40-year highs, stretching pocketbooks and causing hardship for many Americans. Some economists call it inflation shock, accompanied by predictions of a recession. The Federal Reserve is responding by raising interest rates. Forbes Media CEO and former Republican presidential candidate Steve Forbes believes the Fed's efforts to cool down the economy may only make matters worse.
That's what they mean when they say soft landing. What they really mean is more unemployment, and too often it leads to a crash landing for the economy.
In his new book, Inflation, Forbes provides readers an easy-to-understand primer on inflation, why it's bad and how to fix it. He says skyrocketing price increases are only the symptoms, not the cause of inflation. Forbes blames out-of-control spending as one cause. Americans have seen the national debt triple since President Obama entered office in January 2009. It now stands at more than $30 trillion. Forbes points to a concept embraced by Congress and the president called modern monetary theory.
Modern monetary theory says you can devalue the dollar, you can print as many dollars as you like, spend as much as you like without consequences. And that's what we're experiencing today. They trash the dollar, they hurt production, and prices go up.
And what about non-monetary inflation? A COVID outbreak caused China's communist government to confine Shanghai residents to their homes during the month of April. That led to a slowdown in manufacturing. Shanghai is a manufacturing hub and home to the world's largest port. Similar lockdowns are already underway in parts of Beijing. So how might that affect the global supply chain and prices here in the United States?
Do you expect prices of many consumer products to jump even more so due to lack of availability?
Well, what that means is that price increases are going to be continuing to be with us. And that's, again, the non-monetary kind of inflation, this kind of artificial disruption, shutting down a whole city, the most sophisticated, largest city in China. Very foolish, but they did it, and that hurts. And those kinds of things, that monetary kind of inflation guy, is something that if governments just leave the economy alone, people will work it out, get around it.
Forbes believes Americans need to be prepared for worse inflation in the months ahead.
If you think prices are bad now, wait until a year and a half when the Federal Reserve follows through on printing a lot more money. Then you're going to really hurt at the pump and at the marketplace.
As individuals seek to protect their money and investments, they could be tempted to look to cryptocurrency. Forbes, however, prefers stablecoins over Bitcoin.
Stablecoin cryptocurrencies are tied to a specific asset like gold or the dollar, so you don't get the kind of fluctuations. And so Bitcoin, you would never take a mortgage out in Bitcoin. Let's say you took a $250,000 mortgage out in Bitcoin, you may up a year later owing $2.5 million. And so that kind of instability doesn't make it work for as a currency. But I see the time coming, and we discuss this in the book, is that stable coins could eventually be a competitor to government money like the dollar or the pound or the yen or the euro. People use these stable coins rather than the untrustworthy money that comes from government.
And I can't let you go without asking you, flat tax, you still believe in that?
I believe it in more than ever, as we now have literally millions of words in the corrupt federal income tax code that nobody understands. The IRS is hopeless today. I used to say bury the code, but the EPA probably wouldn't allow that since it's so toxic. So just throw it out and just start all over again, single rate. You know, under a flat tax, for example, a family of 4, their first $52,800 of salary would be free of federal income tax. Go to a simple flat tax, go to doing what we did for 180 years, fix the dollar to gold, and by golly, you'd see this country boom like it's never done before.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Coming up, a bird, a plane, or a national security threat. A historic briefing on Capitol Hill puts the spotlight on new UFO footage. We'll discuss next.
Finally tonight, it's one of few bipartisan issues in Congress. For the first time in 50 years, lawmakers discussing the potential dangers of UFOs.
That's right. Members of a House Intelligence Subcommittee met Tuesday morning to evaluate new footage of UFOs, or what they're now calling unidentified aerial phenomena.
Recorded while the U.S. Navy ship observed a number of small unmanned aerial systems in the area. And importantly, the video was taken through night vision goggles with a single lens reflex camera. These remained unresolved for several years.
The hearing follows years of unexplained sightings by U.S. military personnel. Now officials are finally taking a serious look, focusing on transparency for the public and protecting our national security. Jenna, any thoughts? Have you ever seen a UFO?
I haven't, but I definitely know people who believe in that and think it's out there, and it's a fascinating thing to think about.
So many unexplainables.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for watching Faith Nation.
Have a great night.